So today we're going to be talking about how is the signal generated in an X-ray image. So the fancy way of calling it is the differential X-ray contrast. But basically we're just talking about how is it that as X-rays pass through your body, we're actually generating an image that is of diagnostic utility, and what is the actual contrast that we're looking at. Hey guys, I'm Brian Knapp from HowRadiologyWorks.com. We have bite-sized content that's of interest for those in the radiology field. If that sounds good to you, click below on subscribe and then click on the little bell icon so you can get notified when we release new content. And then specifically today, it's going to be a little different than usual. I've got my 3-year-old son helping out, and he's going to help out to show what are the different possible interaction types that we could have between those X-rays coming in, and as they pass through the body, what could happen potentially? What are the different interactions? So the first thing we're going to talk about is the scene, essentially. On the ground here in our basement, we've got set up an outline. So that tape outline is like the person. And then we're going to simulate X-rays going through that person by rolling balls. So the little balls that we're going to roll through, those are the X-rays. Those are our simulated X-ray. And then, for instance, our patient here has ribs. And those ribs you can see right there in the middle. And then in addition to the ribs, we're also having some other tissue, for instance, tissue which could be scattering of the X-rays. Those are demonstrated there as well. Then you can see at the end, you see our simulated detector here. So these wooden blocks here at the end, those are the simulated detector. So again, we'll be rolling the X-rays through the patient, and they potentially could interact in the patient or cross on through and get measured in the detector. The photoelectric effect is the first demonstration we're going to show. So as my son rolls the ball through, if the X-ray stops locally, for instance, in a bone, X-rays would be more likely to stop locally in the bone due to the photoelectric effect. So they will deposit their energy locally in the bone if they interact via the photoelectric effect, and they will not pass through onto the detector. Primary X-rays making it all the way through. In this case, we call it remnant X-rays, the X-rays which make it through the patient and which then can be measured on the detector. So in this case, you see the X-ray passing all the way through, not interacting at all in the patient, and getting measured on the detector. We'll also show one thing that happened, which really does happen in real acquisitions as well, is the case where an X-ray could pass all the way through, hits the anti-scatter grid, or hits an area of the detector which is not an active area. In this case, it would not be a measured X-ray photon. So that's a case that we saw in this example, and it is something that can happen in reality as well. Then we'll also show the case of X-ray scattering. So here's what happens as the X-ray comes through. If the X-ray coming out of the X-ray tube interacts with the patient via Compton scattering, that X-ray then will come off at some angle and will not deposit all of its energy locally. It will deposit some of its energy locally, but then a significant fraction of its energy could be going through with that X-ray as it passes through. Kind of scattering more to the side. The X-ray could either scatter just slightly and still be measured on the detector itself, or it could scatter significantly and outscatter and not be measured on the detector at all. But in general, the X-ray scatter will be forward focused, so more of the X-ray scatter will be in the forward direction than coming off to the side. But you can see why, as the X-rays scatter out, they will lead to artifacts in our image, because the X-rays are not traveling when they're measured on the detector. They're not coming and the line connecting the X-ray tube and that detector as we're anticipating them. So we talked about all the basic interactions which can happen. You also could have some small fraction of interactions via coherent scattering. In that case, the X-ray coming in and going out have the same energy. And generally, this is relatively inconsequential at diagnostic X-ray energies. Look at the detector. We can see on the detector we had more X-rays which passed through and were measured on the detector behind regions where there was relatively low attenuation. So especially behind the regions where there was bone, we had relatively few X-rays. So the contrast in our image that we're going to measure on the detector, that contrast is primarily due to the difference between the photons which stop in the body, so especially those which stop in the body via photoelectric effect, and those which pass all the way through. So this is why the contrast is very good in X-ray images for bone or for iodinated contrast, things like that, which have high Z and which are likely to have a large percentage of interactions with photoelectric effect. That's the general idea, is that, again, contrast in your image is just the difference between those X-rays which stop, deposit their energy locally, and the X-rays which travel all the way through. And then scatter, like we talked about, leads to artifacts in our X-ray images, namely an overall haze in the background of the X-ray image, because those scattered photons end up going mostly forward in the direction of the detector, but they're not going exactly where we would predict them to go. So in that case, it'll end up leading to an overall blurring or background haze in our X-ray images. Now you have the basic idea of how we generate contrast in our X-ray images. And it's really important to understand the details, more physics-based details of photoelectric and of the Compton interactions, because in that case, you can understand that there's energy dependence and there's a dependence especially on the Z for these different types of interactions. So check out those videos coming up.